Awesome. Let's start this out. Okay, Olivia, tell us what we're talking about today.
Okay, so welcome everyone. We are having a discussion about, oh my gosh, I forgot.
Righteous judgment coming your way.
Is judgment ever righteous? So this is something that we want to talk about because it's very, very common, especially in the church, to struggle with judgment. And sometimes we justify that judgment by calling it righteous. So the question is judgment ever truly righteous?
Great question, Liv. And I think for my perspective on righteous judgment is like, where is the need for judgment? So for your guys' perspective, like, where is judgment needed in the first place so that we can differentiate between, okay, where do I actually need to judge? And then where do I not need to judge in certain scenarios? Then from there, I think we can break down, okay, like, where does this righteous aspect come into play as well?
Yeah, by the way, I think if you turn down the volume on your computer and turn up the volume on your phone, it's probably best option. Mute your computer, turn volume up on the phone, then we'll lose the echo.
Perfect.
Awesome. Okay. Yes, great question. Yeah, righteous judgment. Here's the thing, though. I don't know if there is righteous judgment because Jesus just told us not to judge. Like, he didn't say judge unless it's right now at this right time, right? I mean, really, what would you have to feel in order to be doing righteous judgment? You would have to believe that your judgment is better than someone else's, which would then be judgmental.
And isn't that just a perception?
Yes, I think it is a perception. And the problem with judgment, I think this is really what goes on in people's minds. First of all, it's like they really actually feel bad for someone else. Yeah, like I think that's what it is mostly. It's like they feel bad for someone else. They feel bad for their situation in life. And they want to help, like, let's say someone stopped going to church or someone isn't living righteously, might be the word that they would use. And it's very easy to be like, well, I care about that person, so I'm going to judge them, right? They're going to be like, well, if you go down this path, then you're going to have all these terrible things happen, right? Like, it's like, if you leave the church, then it's going to break the chain of righteousness for all the generations, and they're all going to know it was you that broke the chain of righteousness all the way back in time, right? And it's like, I don't know if that's how it works anyway.
Well, and something else too that I have just kind of tuned into, this is also something that I was guilty of, was, well, I need to judge other people so that I know I'm doing right from wrong, I'm establishing boundaries, and that kind of a thing. But the reality is that all judgment is projection. So you cannot make a judgment that isn't a projection. And a way to look at the scripture of judge not that ye be not judged, I used to internalize that as, well, in the same standard that I hold other people, that's the same standard that God will hold me to, right? And that's where you can kind of like justify righteous judgment. However, said another way, judge other people not that you don't judge yourself is grace to stop being so self-critical. Because like I said, judgments are all projection. And so what you're frustrated about in other people, that's what's frustrating you internally. And the reason that I say it's projection is because this is the subconscious's attempt to create space between you and the thing that you are judging, and to say this doesn't exist in me because I identify it outside of me and I dislike it, I disown it, I disassociate from it. But that space is a deception, right? Because anything that you're saying, I don't like that in someone else, there's a reason you don't like it in someone else. And the reason is because you've identified it in yourself and you're trying to like let it go, or you're trying to free yourself of it.
So really, this is where the idea and the teaching of the mirror comes in, where like instead of believing that our world is reality and we're living in it, instead we believe that the world is within and we're projecting that out. And so the scripture is helping us, from our perspective, is helping us see, if I am judging, that's because there's something in that person that's not okay within me. So I think that judgment, instead of viewing it as like, I'm judging them, it's more of a tool for yourself, which is why God invites us, like, judge ye not lest ye be judged, to help us understand this law of the mirror and this projection. Like when we judge other people, are we really just seeing things in them that we need to work on ourselves? Or do we see them having things that we want? Because there's also judgments of envy and jealousy and things of that nature as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the root of a lot of righteous judgment, is the feeling that someone is envious. Actually, I think a lot of people are subconsciously envious of what someone might be doing because they've never given themselves that freedom to do what that person is doing. And this is like a very uncomfortable truth, right? Because it gets you to question like how righteous you actually are in your heart. Because really what matters is where you are in your heart, right? Like what you actually truly desire in life. And what happens a lot, I feel, in Christian communities, in the LDS church, is that people suppress certain desires. They suppress them pretty hard, so that when someone actually that's in that community goes out and does those desires, albeit probably not the best way to do those desires, those people start judging them righteously because they feel like they actually want that kind of freedom that that person's given them. Now, there's a difference between wanting freedom and expressing freedom, right? So just because someone expresses freedom in a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way to express that freedom for that individual, because you could lose freedom by expressing it in certain ways. But the idea is this, is that being in a religion, being a follower of Christ, the whole point of the religion is to have freedom, is to become free. That's the whole point. Right. And so if there's so many things, it's like, well, I have to go to this meeting, I have to do this, I have to minister, I have to do this, I have to pray every day, I have to read my scriptures every day, all these things that you feel like you have to do, that's basically saying you're not free to do them. So like that word have to and need to, that's just another way of saying you're not free. You're a slave to whatever it is you're feeling like you have to do.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you let that go, then actually a lot of the judgment will release too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what I find so interesting in kind of the judgment culture of church members, is that there's a stigma that's being painted among them that the church is restricting you, right? And so to adhere to the church is to live a strict lifestyle. And so you can't go drink, you can't go have sex with people, you can't go like all of these things that are not taught within the church. And so it's painted in this view of these are all of these things that I maybe want to do, I won't admit that I want to do them, I see other people doing them, and so in order to reconcile that inside me, because I want it and I won't admit that I want it, I'm going to judge the people who do it. And when you can actually take a step back and say the actual reality of the gospel itself is pure freedom, right? It's absolute sovereignty, it's absolute ability and agency to live however you want. And if you view the gospel in a wrong way and say that it is restrictive, not freeing, then that's what breeds a lot of that judgment inside of you towards people who you perceive as living a free life, when, you know, they're like doing what it seems drunk all of the time. Well, usually those people are slaves to alcohol. And so it's like this dichotomy of what's real freedom, and, you know, why am I not allowing myself to see what's true freedom within the gospel?
Right. And so I think from what you're saying as well, Liv, like where I kind of make this distinction between like, okay, like, is this me like coping with something, or am I trying to, create this scenario? Like, what is going on when I'm experiencing these judgments, and like, how do I go about it? How do I actually solve this moving forward? A big part of this is like realizing a part of the human experience is like literally doing what you want. Like, you've been given free agency to do what you want. And I think a lot of times when we are like looking at these rules and guidelines, we look at it as a restriction rather than kind of a law, like a universal law. And I don't know if this is the wrong perception of God, but I see something greater than God in the universe, which is law, like universal law. And from what I've seen and what I've experienced about God in my life, he follows these certain standards because he knows the repercussions of those standards. And because he knows that, he like wouldn't do that to himself. But we as mortals, like we don't know what it's like to touch the hot stove yet. So a lot of times, like, we see people touching the hot stove and we're like, I want to touch the hot stove too. And we create that animosity because like we deep down, we don't have and feel the freedom, because if we're all like, if the whole purpose of religion and the whole purpose of spirituality is to give us freedom, and we are not experiencing freedom, that's going to create like that discongruence and that like dissonance between having freedom, but also like following the commandments and the guidelines of God as well. So when we experience that, that's when we start to have problems. Now, how to solve that, like what I've personally done is like realize, why is that a commandment that I'm judging other people for? Because I'm really judging myself. Like, if this is a commandment I have a problem with, or a guideline or culture thing, like, why do I have a problem with that? That person is bringing up the mirror for myself. So the first thing you do is realize, like, this whole world, it's about me. And that may be a selfish thing to say, but it's true. If I didn't exist, this world wouldn't be here. You guys wouldn't exist either. And vice versa. If you didn't exist, I wouldn't exist in your world either. So you really are at the center of your universe, right? And with that, you can take personal responsibility to see, like, when something's going on in the world, I can either say it's just happening to happenstance, or I can say there's a reason behind it. So if you are feeling those feelings of judgment, I'm not necessarily saying it's good or bad, but what are you learning from that? That's the real question that I want to ask.
Well, the reality is that freedom is when you rid yourself of judgment and you act to how you want. That's freedom. When you rid yourself of judgment, you act how you want. And I'll even argue that people that are acting in ways that are expressing that freedom, but have negative consequences in the future, they're not actually fully releasing judgment for themselves. And once you fully release judgment, then it's pretty easy to do what you want and feel great about it. And so that really is, to me, in a nutshell, that's what freedom is. And it's important. And it's really, that's like the essence of repentance too, is actually getting rid of judgment. Like, that's repentance to me. You get rid of judgment, because as soon as you're judging something for what it may or may not be, it creates a reality for you. It makes you less flexible as a believer, because you've defined a certain judgment about it. And so the question is, what are the judgments that you can make, right? What are really the choices that you can make that provide the most flexibility for you as a believer in Jesus Christ? And as soon as judgment's there, it solidifies reality for you. And so you want to figure out, how do I get everything that I want, right? And do you think like Jesus Christ went up to the sinners he helped and the people that had ailments and judged them for their ailments? Or did he just accept it how it was without judgment and just heal them? Right? Like it's a really good question. You know, I feel like the only people he was, you could say, using righteous judgment against were the ones that were using righteous judgment.
Mhm.
Which is ironic, right?
Well, and think about the power of Christ is exercised through a lack of judgment, right? Like you have to release that in order to be healed through Christ, because judgment exists. I see it almost as a lower law where it's kind of this very baseline guidance system of what do I believe, what do I want, you know, how do I want to determine my morals, you know, and all of that. And once you give yourself the ability to explore all of those things, to be curious and to decide for yourself, okay, this is who I am, this is how I choose to live, and you know, this is my end goal, this is what I'm working towards, then there's no longer a need for judgment, because you don't need to like base any of those decisions or any of your actions off of anyone else. And judgment truly is always in relation to other people. And I think that's what causes us to use judgment towards ourselves and to be really critical of ourselves and to like deny ourselves what we want, because it's like, well, what do other people think of the fact that I'm doing or not doing this thing? What's their opinion of me living this way? And so you're basically putting your decisions and who you are in the hands of people outside of you. And so when you reclaim your sovereignty, when you decide, no, I'm going to be who I choose to be, regardless of the people around me, then there's no more need for judgment, right?
Right. So I guess for you, Liv and Ken, like, how did you guys go about that process of what Liv just talked about? Like, how do you let go of that? Because I feel like, you know, even though growing up in Utah, like I still judge, like it's hard for me not to judge. And that's obviously something I'm working on, but like, how do I let go of that self-judgment that's holding me back? Like, what would you guys say?
Well, you have to realize that judgment is how you create reality. And so when you fully let go of judgment 100%, then you realize that reality is flexible. And so when you, let's say it this way, a judgment is a limitation. Yeah. So like, for example, if you say, I'm not good enough to make $1 million this year, that's a judgment, right? And it's a limitation. Judgment is a limitation, right? If you say, I could have, I don't know, all the money's mine already, it can just come to me anytime I want it, you know, then you're starting to release judgment about your circumstances, right? You're just saying like, if you just accept who you are, if you accept fully who you are, which I was reading in some apocrypha, which is really stuff. It's about Adam. And there's this one verse that says, before the angels were fearful of Adam, and now Adam is fearful of the angels. And this was after his fall, right? Like if you really let that sink in and what that actually means, right? Is like when you judge yourself, you're making yourself believe limits about yourself. And when you say there's really only one reality that you can accept that will actually help you, It's that you are a child of God, which puts you on par with Him. And so whatever reality you want to make, you can create.
Yeah. I also think that like very much in conjunction with that of taking ownership of your reality is to understand the identity that you're taking for yourself, that you're gaining from your judgments, right? So to release the people around you of judgment is to identify, like, how am I identifying in this judgment of this person? What are they doing in relation to me that's causing me question, that's causing me frustration, that's causing me to feel some type of way, right? And so that's why there's so much power in just understanding, okay, the people that I'm judging, like I have an identity in them, right? I'm causing relation between me and them in this judgment. The judgment is kind of the rope that ties you to an identity. And so you've got to get curious around, okay, well, why have I created an identity in this judgment, in this person, and whatever I'm seeing? Like, just to give a concrete example, for me, I used to be really judgmental of girls who wore shorty shorts because I always wanted to wear shorty shorts, but I didn't want to wear shorty shorts. And so it was like an identity for me to say, I'm more righteous than these girls because I want to wear the shorts, but I choose not to because I choose to be modest. And so in this way, I'm better than that.
It gave you a way to feel good about yourself for not giving yourself what you want.
Yes. So it was kind of like this pseudo reward for denying myself what I want. And it wasn't until I could like really analyze that and say, not just, well, why do I need to prop myself up like that? But also, why do I want to wear shorty shorts? And why am I making it mean something bad about me? Right. And so just following along that train of thought and not judging it, of course. And this process is commonly referred to as becoming the gentle observer. And so it's just a process of getting curious without meaning towards those judgments and saying, okay, well, I like showing off my legs. I don't enjoy wearing clothes particularly, like all of these things, and like following them down the line of, is it okay for me to have this desire? And just saying yes, like that's okay. That's okay for me to wear these shorts if I want to. And it's okay for me to be over it if that doesn't really mean as much as I think that it means. And then it's just neutralizing the judgment because it no longer means anything about me.
Yeah. And I think that's really good advice from Kenny and Liv in terms of like, how do I work on this piece of judgment on other people and myself? And just to like add on to what Liv has said, like a tactical strategy, like something you can actually implement that she's talking about is being flexible and aware of how you label things in your life. So this is where you become very flexible with your communication. This is going to be helpful in many different areas, but like flexible thinking and flexible communication is what really allows you to gain neutrality in what you view as far as like the world being the way that it is. Because when you come from a place of neutrality, that's when you can really, like Liv said, become that peaceful observer and decide for yourself how you want to act and how you want to be free. Once you can get to that point, you guys will start to make decisions based off of what you want instead of based off of how you feel, right? You may feel shameful, guilty, and we're going to help you release those emotions so that you can feel the way that you were intended to feel: limitless, abundant, happy, joyful, hopeful. And because of those things, you'll be more in control of what you create and less likely to judge others because there will be less reflections in others for you to judge. But anytime those, reflections come up, instead of being so labeling, we release that word and we become neutral to what they're doing. Oh, that person drinks or they had sex or whatever that is. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad child of Heavenly Fathers. That just means they're going about agency in their own way. And that's reflecting something back on me that I can learn. And that's truly what I feel is like the shift that you guys can make to be happy, fulfilled, and less judgeful of yourself and others moving forward.
Yeah, the key to healing is acceptance. So you can't, like, it's really hard to change reality unless you first accepted what reality is, because you don't know what you're changing otherwise. Like you have no idea what that actually is. So it's important, like what Olivia said, it was important for her to realize her desires, right? It's like she actually desired that, which isn't about, I'm not judging you here, Olivia, I'm just saying you had that
Right.
realization, right? And I've had those too, right? Like I've recently come to the realization that I'm like, yeah, I want to be that rock star that drives a nice car. Like I suppressed that for so long. I thought it was such a bad desire to have, right? And I would judge people that would do that. I would judge people that were flashy, right? But usually if you're judging someone, that just means you want it.
Right.
And the judgment is what enslaves you. That is the exact thing that enslaves you. And as soon as you let it go, then you can be free and you can just have everything happen how you want to have it. Right now, I am involved in some missionary lessons. And there's this father in this family, there's kids in it, and there's a whole family. And the father's a member of the church. He hasn't been to church for decades. And I told him, I said, we had very good discussions about the gospel and everything. And I said, what do you think about coming to church? And he's like, well, I don't know. I'll come when it's time. I'll come. He said this, I'll come when I want to come.
Good.
And I said, good. That's the only time then when it's good to go to church is when you want to go. That's all I said. And he was surprised, right? Because normally anyone else would be like, well, you got to think about this. And they try and argue him out of it. And they try and which is really judgmental if you think about it, right? It's like saying your choice is not good. My choice is better, right? Like I make better choices than you. So let me project my better choices upon you.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, I just accepted what he's at, And then a few weeks later, he texts, he's like, okay, I want to talk more. Like none of that, like he wouldn't be wanting to move forward had I not just accepted where he was at. And so if there's anybody out there that's listening to this and you're thinking of even friends you have or family that you have, where you're like, oh, I wish they would interact more in the church, or I wish they'd go to the temple, or I wish they would wear their garments, or I wish they would stop drinking, or all that kind of stuff. It won't happen until you release the judgment about them. And you just accept them exactly how they are. And then you finally will have the power to even talk to them in a way that they understand.
Yeah. Well, so to like solidify that very concept too. So often the reason why we feel the need to judge other people is to convince them of our choices, right? Because what we're doing is we're saying, if you're right, then I'm wrong. And I can't be wrong. So I need to find a way to make you see that what you're doing is wrong. Right. So you're creating meaning about your choices and who you are in someone else's choices, because you've decided if they're right, then that means you're wrong. And if you're right, then that means that they're wrong. And this is why our society is honestly in the way that it is about politics, is because there is no, I can be right and convicted to what I think is correct, because that inherently means you have to be wrong and you have to be incorrect. And so I have to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong. Otherwise, that means that I'm wrong. And it's that key of right and wrong where a lot of judgment is playing in, because ultimately we need to be governing ourselves. And yes, I believe in absolute truth, and how people choose to live is typically what's right for them in the moment, and that will change over time, right? So it's and it can't change and it won't change, like you said, Ken, without the acceptance. And so sometimes, yes, we dig our heels in because we cannot accept something that we want, something that we think, something that we believe, and that's what causes all of this chaos inside of us and all of this chaos outside of us, to who we're fighting with, who we're talking to, who we're judging, and all of that, because we're not just saying, I don't need to worry about other people. I don't need to save other people, right? That's what Jesus does. I only need to worry about, am I living in the best way that I can live, and not making other people's choices mean something about the choices that I have chosen.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jen and Liv, I love the insights that you guys have shared. For me personally, I think there's 3 big takeaways from our conversation today that really hit home and are going to go with me going into next week. But number 1 is like, take 100% responsibility for your life and realize that all of these things that are happening to you are actually happening for you, or even an upgrade for that from that is you're causing that. You're the one that is causing reality to happen because you're alive. If you weren't, you wouldn't be able to create that. The second aspect is the world is a mirror, right? So as you're feeling these judgments, realize like you are the center, you can project that, and that's your reality. Reality is your perception and your projection. So as these judgments are coming back, like look at yourself and say like, you know, what is this teaching me? What can I learn from this? And then move on. And then the last one is like, be flexible and less critical. So flexible in your communication, flexible in your labels, and less critical on yourself and others as you give them space to become more like God as a child of God throughout this life. So that was my big 3 takeaways, and really what I'm focusing on and applying this next week.
Awesome. Yeah. Love the conversation. For those of you that are on Instagram, find us on Facebook as well. We have a group. It's called Creo-Wealth Institute. And I'm sure Olivia will put it in the comments today, a link to that. Join that group if you're here on Instagram. If you're listening on Facebook, one thing that we'll say is we are creating a free course, and it's really actually live. It'll all be live with us. It'll be a free one once a week for 6 weeks. You can join in on the conversation about debunking wealth myths, first of all. So there's some myths we may have learned in church or in our communities that were really purely cultural. And part of what we do is we help you reprogram those beliefs so that you actually have the right beliefs about making money, and you choose to make money in a way that's most helpful to you. So join the Facebook group. That's the only way you're going to get access to that course. It's live. I mean, it will become a course to take part in it. So join the Facebook group, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, I dropped a comment of what it's called, but you can also just go to the link in my bio and click on it from the link tree. Like we said, it's a free group, and if you like this discussion, if you want to be part of more discussions, then join the group, join our course, because we need as many people as we can to spread this message and to help so many people break out of their current paradigms that are keeping them small.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys. We're still live on Facebook, I think.